I never intended to scrutinize our phone bill that closely. After 15 years of marriage, Rachel and I had settled into a comfortable routine where I handled the mortgage and utilities, while she managed groceries and household expenses. But that December evening, something caught my eye. A staggering 236-page detailed call log attached to our bill. I initially assumed it was a mistake, some technical glitch that needed sorting out with the phone company. Setting aside my laptop and reaching for my reading glasses, I began scrolling through the log. One number appeared repeatedly, sometimes dozens of times per day. Late-night calls stretching into early morning hours, hundreds of text messages exchanged during work hours, weekends, even during our recent anniversary dinner. Patterns stretched back 6 months, growing more frequent with each passing month. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My wife was living a separate life through her phone, carrying on countless conversations with someone who wasn't me. I found myself calculating the hours spent on these calls, adding up the text messages, trying to understand the sheer magnitude of this deception. During family dinners, movie nights with our kids, lazy Sunday mornings in bed, how many of those moments had she been mentally elsewhere, composing messages to this mysterious number? My hands shaking, I copied the number into a reverse lookup website. The name that appeared made my heart stop. Christopher Martinez, the same Chris she'd dated in high school, whose name occasionally came up when we reminisced about our teenage years. The same Chris who'd moved away to California after graduation, breaking her heart in the process. The same Chris who, according to her occasional social media updates, had recently moved back to town after his divorce. Memories flooded back of Rachel, mentioning running into him at our 20-year high school reunion 6 months ago. She'd been surprisingly casual about it, mentioning their brief conversation in passing. "He hasn't changed much," she'd said with a shrug. "Still the same old Chris." I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Secure in our marriage, confident in the life we'd built together. The kids were at their grandmother's house that evening, giving me time to process this discovery alone. I poured myself a scotch and continued analyzing the phone records, noting patterns that now seemed obvious. The calls always ended before I got home from work. The text messages clustered during her lunch breaks or late at night. She'd been careful, methodical even, in carving out this secret space in our lives. When Rachel came home from her book club meeting that night, I was sitting in our darkened living room, the phone bill spread out on the coffee table before me. She flipped on the lights, chattering about the novel they'd discussed, then froze when she saw my face. "We need to talk about Chris," I said quietly, watching as the color drained from her face. She didn't ask which Chris, didn't pretend not to understand. Instead, she sank into the armchair across from me, her purse sliding to the floor unnoticed. The confession came in pieces, each revelation more painful than the last. They'd reconnected at the reunion, exchanged numbers under the guise of catching up. The first few messages were innocent enough, sharing memories, updating each other on their lives. But soon the conversations deepened, tapping into old feelings, resurrecting the intensity of first love. "He was my first everything," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "First kiss, first love, first heartbreak. Seeing him again, it was like being 17 all over again." All those feelings I thought I'd outgrown came rushing back. I listened as she described their emotional affair, how their daily conversations became a secret world, separate from her real life. They met for coffee twice, she admitted, but nothing physical had happened. I couldn't cross that line, she insisted, though the pain in her voice suggested she'd considered it. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" I asked, my own voice thick with emotion. 15 years together, and you couldn't tell me you were unhappy." "I wasn't unhappy," she responded, and somehow that hurt worse. "I love our life together, love you and the kids. But Chris, he represents a road not taken, a version of myself I left behind. Talking to him made me feel young again, exciting, full of possibilities." The next few weeks were a blur of painful conversations and sleepless nights. Rachel cut off contact with Chris immediately, even changing her phone number. We started marriage counseling, learning to articulate feelings we'd both let simmer beneath the surface. The comfortable routine we'd settled into had become a kind of complacency, we realized. We'd stopped sharing our inner lives, content with managing household logistics and parenting duties. In therapy, Rachel confronted her midlife anxieties, fears of aging, of opportunities passed by, of adventures not taken. The affair with Chris wasn't really about him, our counselor helped us understand, but about reconnecting with a version of herself that existed before mortgages and responsibilities, before becoming a wife and mother. I had my own reckoning to face. I'd taken our marriage for granted, assumed that love alone would sustain us through the decades. I'd stopped courting my wife, stopped trying to understand her evolving dreams and fears. While I was proud of the life we'd built together, I'd forgotten that relationships require constant nurturing, not just maintenance. Healing didn't happen overnight. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired with a simple apology or promise to do better. We had to rebuild our connection from the ground up, learning to communicate not just about daily logistics, but about our deepest fears and desires. Date nights became sacred territory, not just dinner and a movie, but real conversations about our hopes for the future. The kids, thankfully, remained oblivious to the turmoil. At ages 12 and 9, they noticed our increased attention to each other, but attributed it to normal parent behavior. If anything, our conscious effort to rebuild our marriage made us better parents, more attuned to the emotional needs of our children. 6 months after discovering the phone bill, Rachel and I took a weekend trip to the coast, just the two of us. Sitting on the beach at sunset, she confessed that she'd driven past Chris's office a few weeks earlier. I felt nothing, she said, squeezing my hand. No butterflies, no nostalgia, not even regret. He's part of my past, and that's where he belongs. I believed her, not because the hurt had completely healed, but because we'd done the hard work of understanding why it happened. We'd faced our individual and collective failures, acknowledged the dangerous comfort of nostalgia, and chosen to build something new, rather than trying to recapture what was lost. Looking back now, that phone bill was both an ending and a beginning. It ended the comfortable illusion that love alone could sustain a marriage, that trust once earned is forever unshakable, but it began a deeper understanding of what it means to choose each other, not just once at the altar, but every day through small acts of attention and care. Rachel and I still have the occasional difficult moment, times when trust feels fragile or communication breaks down, but we've learned to recognize these moments as opportunities for growth rather than signs of failure. The affair with Chris, painful as it was, forced us to confront the difference between comfort and contentment, between sharing a life and truly living one together. Last week, I came across that old phone bill while cleaning out my home office. The pain has dulled, replaced by a sort of grateful understanding that sometimes we need to break before we can rebuild stronger. Rachel and I aren't the same couple we were before the affair, but maybe that's not a bad thing. We're more honest now, more intentional in our love, more aware of how easily connection can slip away if not carefully tended. The numbers on that bill no longer hold power over me. They're just digits on a page, a reminder of a crisis that could have ended our marriage, but instead transformed it. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't preventing mistakes, but choosing to heal from them together.